What's up, guys? Today I'm in the garage and I'm about to work on another project sort of as a continuation of one that I started 2 years ago when I first got my hands on the Dayton Audio Ultimax 15 subwoofer that came at the time with a 3 cubic foot flat pack sized specifically for that woofer, and I had done a video on the construction of the box and trying that all out. And now about 2 years later, I have another flat pack, ultimately from the same company, the DIY Soundgroup. They're the ones that supply the flat packs to Parts Express. This one is made of Baltic birch and it's about a cubic foot larger. It's 4 cubic feet instead of 3, also meant for that same 15-inch woofer. And so, I consider this a bit of an upgrade because it's Baltic birch. That should have a nicer look to it than just medium density fiberboard that's kind of whatever. But also, it's lighter material, so despite being a larger box, it actually weighs, I think, about the same as the smaller box, and that extra foot of cubic space inside, I am hoping, will open up that sub a little bit. The 3 cubic foot box, they recommend that you do a whole bunch with Poly-fil stuffing and everything to kind of damp it a bit more. And bring that F3 down to, I think they say 35 hertz is where it gets you. And I thought it sounded good that way, but I'm also curious if the extra cubic foot will help that a bit further, and either if we still use Poly-fil we can get a little further out of it, or maybe not even need to bother with Poly-fil because the box is adequately sized. Some of Dayton Audio's information suggests using a 4 cubic foot box actually. So I think it might be an example of where a lot of retailers just sell products with undersized boxes because it takes up less shelf space, or they think people would be more willing to buy a small box for their living room because it's less obtrusive. But in all of those examples, people always say, but the bigger box ends up being better. So we're going to find out, and first things first, we've got to open up this box. Okay, I'm switching to hand camera mode so you can see this. I have just loosely set all of the brace pieces into the grooves that they're cut into this panel here. And just to get a feel for what it's going to look like and how it's going to go together. And you can see with this that they're meant to line up right here. And I noticed putting these in, the notch goes a little further than the piece does. So we definitely don't want to pull it all the way forward, because you see in the back here now, there would be a gap where it's not going to line up. So definitely when I get to the point, this is why I'm glad I did this, because if I already had glue in place, I'd be frantically trying to move it before the glue sets. So now I can know in advance, probably to come out here and then just take a mallet or something, or just use my finger and gently kind of tap it into place so that it's perfectly lined up. And we want to make sure that it's lined up perfectly, because once these two pieces, say on this side, dry and are strong, we're going to take one of these side panels and basically just run the glue across here and up the sides of these. And these panels are going to be, or these supports are going to be basically what holds that wall on. And then we just build around the outside in pieces, and then we can put the top panel on, which will be the front. When this is done. My basic methodology for building this is going to kind of go off of what I did last time, because it worked pretty well. I've got a plastic barrel basically under some drop cloth just for when the glue slides off the edges, which it inevitably probably will. It'll catch that, and I want something that's fairly steady for this but is less wide than the box panel is, so that the glue can run off and not be sticking this. If I put this on a table and the glue ran off the side, it might stick to the table and then I'd have some real problems. So this will help me avoid all of that. And the beauty of these flat packs is pretty much you only need 2 other things to make this happen. One, a good wood glue. I've used Titebond before. I had this recommended to me in a couple forums and stuff where I was asking some advice. The first time I did this, they recommended Titebond. You could probably use any decent wood glue, but I had good results with this last time, so I use it again. I was informed that on these big flat pack boxes, you should plan to use the entire tube. I used probably 80% of my tube the last time I built one of these flat packs. There was a little bit left at the end. It does use a lot of glue, but because you want a good seal and you want everything to be strong, you know, you're often making the choice of use a little too much on purpose, and if it runs out the sides, just mop it up. Better that than going too thin, and then when this woofer is slamming, you know, there's flex in the box or you have other issues. Anyway, other than the wood glue, the main other thing we need are clamps. I have 4 of these. They're large enough that I can size basically the entire width of the box, and I believe 4 should be fine. The last time I did one of these flat packs, I only had 3, and I ran into a couple of snags where I had to make some concessions along the way to make that work, but I'm also going to move a little slower this time. Part of how I ran into trouble last time was trying to put on several sides in one shot, and it just became like it's too hard to hold everything together. Whereas in this case, I might just do like 2 sides at a time. I might do this side and the opposite side after, of course, the braces are dried and strong and in place enough to hold it. That way I can just use a couple of clamps across to kind of pull those side panels against each other to brace it, and then let that dry, and then do these 2 sides. All right, so this is going to be kind of phase 1. Since we're only worried about right now being able to put these 2 sides on, then I only need to worry about glue in these slots to put on those braces, and that's it. One thing to look out for on these is the glue makes it kind of slick, so you can push down to get it to set really well, but then it's actually can move around a lot on you. Whoa. Makes it easy to accidentally go too much. So at this point, I've mopped up the extra glue around the edge. I didn't want there to be a lump there that dried, because then it's not going to line up correctly when I drop the side on. One extra step that we might do is just run a little bead of the glue around the sides here, just to really make sure that that has a lot of strength. But I'm not going to do that just yet, because these were so slippery when I was playing with them, as I talked about, that I'm afraid that if I touch it with the nozzle of this, I might knock it like so it's not straight up, and then if that dries permanently, we're going to have some real problems. So I think I'm going to do this kind of in 2 steps. One, just let this sit for probably 15-20 minutes. It's not enough to make the glue dry, but it's enough to make it set enough that it's got some hold to it. And then I will go around the crack of each piece just to really make sure that's strong, because these supports are going to be holding a lot of things together and absorbing a lot of vibration internally, so we want them to be as strong as possible. And like I said, you go into this knowing you're going to use a lot of glue, so don't be stingy. All right, I'm at it again the next day. So to catch you up, I came back yesterday a little bit later after the first pieces had dried, and I installed these braces as well, just so we had them, and I went around the edges of each of them just to make sure they're real solid. Everything feels good now. Okay, I've jumped ahead, made some headway here, and I definitely have a learning experience to share with you guys as I go. So as you can see, I have all 4 sides on. I can see now, it wasn't a big deal, I was able to make it work. But tip for you guys, don't do what I did, where you start with what are going to be the outside sides first. It seemed logical to me at the time, but what I have seen now is it's impossible to get them completely perfectly straight, and it makes it so that getting this piece in between the 2 sides, I had to take a mallet to drive it down and then like do a lot of pounding to force it in there because it was very tight. And it occurs to me now that if I had started with these walls here, then it probably would have been a lot easier to just stick these side ones right onto it from the outside and then good to go. So if you guys are watching this and thinking of doing this box yourself, my recommendation now would be start with the inner sides and then go to the outside. But like I said, it worked out pretty well. The seams are pretty well lined up. I just got the glue drying now. I amply went all over the seams on the inside. I like to do that just for a little bit of extra strength, especially since a lot of the glue on the flat parts that touch each other squeezes out, you know, in this process. But also for sealing, because in a sealed box design, we want it to be as airtight as possible, and so just running a good bead of glue over every crack just really makes sure. There's one little spot down in there that I think I need to touch again on that note, but otherwise I just like to make sure that it's totally sealed in. That way you don't need to use caulk or anything like that, because the glue can accomplish pretty much the same thing. Okay, I got the camera sitting up a little higher at this point. I have assembled all of the sides of the box and have the first layer of what's going to be the front. Right now it's sitting at the top. That's been drying for a few hours now, probably 3.5 hours. That's close enough. It's not like fully dried to the point obviously we would use it, but it's dried enough that I'm comfortable to take the clamps off and put on the last piece. So I thought I'd capture that on video as we go. First, I will do what I've done with all the pieces before I throw glue down and just do kind of a test lineup just to make sure it's gonna work well. That looks like it is. So that's how that's going to sit. Ultimately, we've got the recess for the woofer to sit right there. So pull that out. Now this part, some people like to do the two top pieces at the same time. I find that too much sliding around. Some people maybe will glue them separately, but I find it hard to get a clamp on something as thin as the two pieces. So my preference every time I do a flat pack like this is just do the first piece first and let it dry so I can put the second piece on and clamp the whole thing. I just find that easier. All right, that looks pretty good to me. I'm just gonna throw some clamps on that and let that dry overnight. And then tomorrow, I should be able to work on the next phase. I think the next thing I'm gonna do is sand everything to get it as smooth as possible, take off where some of the wood glue on the outside dried and discolor it a little bit, see if I can take that off a little better than I had on the last box. And then the last step really will be to install speaker terminals on the back. I'll go over that real quick when I'm at that point, and then other than possibly staining, this will be ready to throw a woofer in and use. All right, at this point the box is fully assembled and I've used a rotary sander to go around, just make sure things are smooth, round off the corners a little bit so that it's not tough. This exposed part here, just make sure that that's soft and it's not rough. Any unevenness there might have been where things didn't line up totally right, I tried to level that off as best I can for the most part, so if you run your finger across it, there's not like an obvious, whoops, there's where that is. I didn't do as good of a job with that the last time I did one of these boxes, so it is something I wanted to make sure I did this time. I put a little bit more glue in the bottom part here because there was a little bit of a gap on this particular side, and I do want this to be airtight, so although the rest of the box is pretty much dry, I've kind of restarted the clock right there. So I have this sitting here, and pretty much this is on its side. This is going to be the top ultimately, so I'm going to be rotating it up so that it sits tall. It seems to me like they intended for you to have the box sitting so that it's wide. And the reason I say that is this panel here goes all the way across so that it's flush on each end, whereas the way I'm going to do it sitting tall, this top is going to have this exposed thing on either side as well. It's not a huge cosmetic thing, but it's something I'm going to live with because for me, you know, I look at it like you have the height, you have that space. This is already a really big subwoofer, a really big box. What I don't need is to go horizontal and make it take up way more floor space than is needed since this is rectangular. So that's the way I'm going to do it. So anyway, this side here is going to be the top once I'm done. So I've already played it out. For me, basically, the stereo is on the right of where the woofer is going to sit, which means that on the inside here, this lower corner is more or less going to be where I drill the hole for the speaker terminals, just so I can keep the wire as short as possible. I could put the speaker terminal basically in the dead center, but I like to keep it close to the floor so there's not a ton of wire hanging down off the back. So I'll probably just put it in that corner there. Alright, so I'm using a 2-inch hole saw on my drill, and the reason for that is because the speaker terminals I have are circular, the way that they go into a hole, and they're very, very close. They're just over 2 inches, so this is a very easy way to get a perfect circle to drop that in. I'm going to come a few inches in and a few inches up. I'm just going to eyeball it. I'm not going to bother measuring it to get like real, concerned about it. Right in here is probably fine. Doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be super smooth. I just don't want ugly jagged edges in there. So pretty much the thing is a square, and it's gonna sit right over this hole. The wires are gonna go in there. That'll allow me to connect speaker terminals to the outside, and then the wires connected to that will go on the inside of the box to the subwoofer. I've got the back hole cut. And this is the speaker terminal that I'm going to use. I took it out of the last box that I was using, so I've got everything clipped in. This is a roll of weather stripping around the outside just to make it fit snug in the hole to try to prevent any air leakage and whatnot. This is 12 gauge speaker wire, so it should be capable of handling everything we're gonna do. So basically, we just feed the wire down in. Line this up pretty straight like we're going to want it. That's what we want. So now, final phase. Now, like I've done before, I'm wiring this in series. Each of the voice coils on this sub are 2 ohms, so in series I'm making this 4. That is what my Crown XLS 1002 ideally is going to want. I have it in bridged mode, so it's pushing about 1100 watts RMS, which I think is pretty good for this sub. Okay guys, I have taken about a week to test the Ultimax in this new box in a variety of situations. I've tried all different genres of music, I've watched it with movies, I watched the new Bond film. Ready to talk about impressions. First, a little critique. These are nitpicks, it's not a huge deal, but they are things I noticed, especially when I went back into my garage and compared this 4 cubic foot box to the previous flat pack that I had, made of medium density fiberboard. The old one featured beveled front on it that like curved really nicely. It give it a really professional finished look. This particular box, the birch one, is all very squared off, so it's not a huge deal, and it's something that if I cared enough about, I could bevel it myself with enough sanding and the right tools. But just comparing the two boxes, I think the shape of the other box was a little bit nicer. I did have to round the corners because they were rather sharp on this box. And like I had commented earlier, it seemed a little unfortunate to me that the way that the pieces go together, it's set up that the way I wanted to make the top, and I suspect most people would make the top, has the exposed sides sticking up on them. Would have been easier to design it so that the piece that's going to sit on the top goes the entire width of the box. And so what you're looking at on the top is just a flush piece of wood with nothing exposed. When I have built boxes myself, that's how I've always done it. And so it's a minor gripe, not a huge deal, just something worth commenting about. On the other hand, the woofer in this box plays very deep and very clean. It sounds great. Music, kick drums were very punchy, very tight. It made the same improvements that I've enjoyed for the last 2 years now to movies and crashes and gunshots and things like that. But I did notice a little bit of an improvement, which is great, on how deep it goes. And that was something I suspected would happen because of the extra cubic foot space of the box. So in the past, the 3 cubic foot with the 3 pounds of poly-fil says that it will get you an F3, which is the point at which the response starts to roll off at 3 decibels, at about 35 hertz. And it would respond a little bit all the way down to about 25 was my experience, and then you didn't really get anything audible at that point. But I noticed in the past that at about 29 hertz, just as you crossed the 30 hertz mark, it would drop off pretty fast. There was a really noticeable drop in volume. I would say that this new box gives you, in the simple measurements that I did one day recording sound effects and then looking at the waveforms, gets you about 2 or 3 extra hertz. So it seems like the F3 is closer to 32 hertz, and I didn't notice a serious drop in volume until about 27 hertz instead of the 29 or 30. So it's not a huge difference, but when you're playing test tones and you're stepping down hertz by hertz, when you're talking that low, that close to the edge of the audible spectrum, I find that a couple extra hertz really does make an appreciable difference, especially for movies that have that really close to infrasonic bass type of stuff. So it's nice. One thing I really wanted to talk about too regarding Poly-fil. So I thought, okay, well, the 3 cubic foot box before wanted you to use 3 pounds of Poly-fil, and that helped it deepen up. Just wanting to experiment, after I'd used the box for a few days, just the box, I took the woofer out and I put 4 pounds of Poly-fil inside of it to follow the normal 1 pound of Poly-fil per cubic foot of the box. And actually in this case, I actually noticed that it, in my opinion, made a pretty noticeable degradation in the sound quality. I don't really think it gave me much extra depth in the bass, and it made the bass sound muddy and kind of muffled, and it made the upper parts of the bass that the subwoofer was doing, I have it cut off at 80 hertz, and those probably like the 65 to 80 range of bass sounded very muted, and it was not accurate anymore. And so the sub just did not sound good. And then the minute I took the woofer out again, removed all the Poly-fil and put it back and played some of the same things again, it sounded tighter, it sounded clearer. And so I wanted to note that just because to me it seems like a good example. A lot of people just use Poly-fil as the holy grail. Always put it in your box. It just universally always makes everything better. Damping is important, people say. In this case, at least in my experience, this box does not need Poly-fil, and actually Poly-fil damages the experience. But I suppose it makes sense because Dayton Audio themselves, in their literature at one point, recommend a 4 cubic foot box. People have discussed that in some of the audio forums. This box is exactly the cubic footage the subwoofer needs. And people have said that if the box gets too big and it overdamps the woofer, that it can create a sloppiness in the sound. So be aware of that. You're welcome, of course, to try it if you're building this same box, but for what it's worth, my opinion is don't bother with the Poly-fil. It sounds very nice and tight on its own, and a big 15 like this with a relatively weak motor, as some people point out, to allow it to have the big excursion, it can use the springiness of a sealed box to tighten it up, and it sounds good. So overall, I'm really happy with the box. Thank you to DIY Soundgroup for creating such a great solution for people. You know, building something that looks this nice with just a few basic tools is not possible for most of us without getting a lot more advanced and complicated than that. So this is a great thing and a great way for people looking to get into building a home theater on a budget. It's, if you're willing to put in the work, this is a much cheaper way to do it. You know, you could buy a woofer like the Ultimax or some other big 15, buy one of these flat packs, and then get yourself some kind of an amp like a Crown or a Behringer or something like that. And generally it's at least several $100s cheaper than going to a retail setup that has everything built into it, unless that's really what you're after. This subwoofer slams. And if you have a big enough amp for it, like I said in the last video about this sub in the other box, it's a lot of sub for my uses. I would get the cops called on me by the neighbors for sound problems way before I ran out of subwoofer on this. It rattles walls. It's great. So hope you guys enjoyed watching this. If you're thinking of buying one of these flat packs, that was a quick overview of the building it and all of that. And catch you guys in the next video.